You're watching Around the World, our top global story. Straight up, another horrific mass shooting in the US, this time in California, a state that has been already battered by floods. And the shooter, who had opened fire at a ballroom dance club near Los Angeles, killing at least 10 people, has now killed himself. Lunar New Year celebrations in California's Monterey Park came to a shocking halt after a man who has now been identified as Hu Can Tran, a 72-year-old Asian man, started shooting indiscriminately. More than 12 hours later, a van was found. Tactical vehicles and bomb squad trucks surrounded it. Officials swarmed in and entered the van only to find the suspect dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
I can confirm that there are no outstanding suspects from the mass shooting incident that occurred, and although that closes a portion of a very long day for all of us, the investigation is still ongoing. Sheriff's homicide detectives are working around the clock, gathering additional information and working on determining the motive behind this extremely tragic event.
But even as the chorus to curb gun culture grows yet again, gun ownership in the US, meanwhile, continues to rise. Firearms deaths, it seems, are a fixture in American life. In the year 2020 alone, more than 45,000 Americans died at the end of a barrel of a gun. Homicide, suicide, you name it. There are more than 120 guns per 100 people in the US. That's more than one gun per person. Scared children, unsettled families, and a community that will now need healing. Monterey Park, which is about 11 kilometers east of Los Angeles, is home to a large Asian community. Thousands had gathered for the Lunar New Year festivities in the city before the attack took place. As a mark of respect for the victims, flags on government buildings will be lowered to half-mast until sunset this Thursday, even as security is being beefed up for Chinese Lunar New Year celebrations across America. Keeping it with the US, where another set of confidential files have been seized at President Joe Biden's home. This is the fourth bunch to have been found. This time, 6 documents were discovered after a 13-hour-long search. While some of the seized documents at Biden's home were from his time as a senator, others are from his tenure as vice president under Barack Obama. Some personally handwritten notes were also taken away. The first batch of classified documents was found on the 2nd of November at the Penn Biden Center, his office when he was a vice president. A second batch of records was found last month in Biden's garage, while another was found in his storage space just a couple of weeks ago. Under the Presidential Records Act of the US, White House records are supposed to go to the National Archives once an administration ends. But it's still not clear why Biden had kept them in his possession, even as he prepares to declare whether he will run for a second term for presidency in 2024 or not. Away from the US to Israel, where trouble is brewing. Nationwide protests have broken out, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been forced to fire his newly appointed minister, even as the country is mired in a crisis over the power of the courts. More than 100,000 Israelis were on the streets of capital Tel Aviv over the weekend. They came to protest against plans by PM Netanyahu's new government to overhaul the country's judicial system. Measures that critics say are disastrous for the country's democratic fundamentals, as it weakens the power of the courts. The protest was attended by former Prime Minister of Israel, Yair Lapid, now the leader of the main opposition party.
What we see is not a government, it's a circus. Netanyahu is weak, but he needs to appoint a full-time health minister and interior minister. Minister Deri was fired because of corruption.
Protesters filled central streets of Tel Aviv city, raising Israeli flags and banners that read, "Israel, we have a problem," even as protests spread to at least 3 other Israeli cities, including Jerusalem, Haifa, and Beersheba. These protests come after another protest last week, which also drew tens of thousands in an early challenge to Netanyahu and his ultra-nationalist and ultra-orthodox government. the most right-wing in Israeli history. In Israel, which does not have a constitution, the Supreme Court currently has the authority to repeal laws or strike down laws it considers discriminatory or unreasonable. The government says judges and the government's legal advisors have too much sway over lawmaking and governance in Israel. In addition to those protests, pressure has built up on Netanyahu's government after he was forced to fire a key cabinet ally, Aryeh Deri, who serves as Interior and Health Minister. This after the Supreme Court of Israel disqualified him for being convicted of tax offenses. This has only deepened the rift in the country over the judicial system and the power of the courts. Netanyahu, who himself is on trial for corruption, vowed to continue with the judicial overhaul plans despite the protests. Opponents say that the changes could help Netanyahu evade conviction in his own corruption trial or even make the court case disappear altogether. Up next, Europe stands as a divided continent today. The Ukraine war has laid bare all the differences, and the two biggest powers of Europe are now trying to reconcile. France's President Emmanuel Macron met Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the Élysée Palace in Paris. It was a day filled with ceremonies and discussions on Europe's security, energy, and other challenges. The occasion was the 60th anniversary since the landmark Élysée Treaty between Germany and France was signed. It sealed a bond between the longtime enemies that underpins today's European Union.
Und wir lassen nicht zu.
We won't let Europe fall back into a time where violence replaced politics and our continent was torn apart by hate and national rivalries.
Scholz also reiterated that support for Ukraine will continue for as long as necessary. However, there is still no clarity on sending tanks to Ukraine. Germany says it will not stand in the way of Poland sending its own stock of German-made Leopard tanks. Ukraine says it asked Germany to send Leopard tanks long back in the month of March last year, just a week after Russia's invasion of Ukraine began. Ukraine says that it is still waiting for those tanks to arrive. In South America, where Brazil's President Lula da Silva has declared a public health emergency in Amazon, the world's largest rainforest, where the indigenous Yanomami community are dying from malnutrition and malaria. President Lula visited them in northern Amazon, where hospitals are overcrowded with Yanomami patients. Lula tore into his predecessor for actively destroying the Amazon by throwing it open to illegal mining.
It's inhuman. What I have seen here, honestly, if the president that left the presidency these days, instead of doing so many motorcycle rallies, had a bit of shame and had come here on one time, maybe these people would not be abundant as they are.
With a population of around 30,000 living in northern Amazonian rainforests, the Yanomami are the largest native indigenous group in Brazil, and the region where they live is as big as the country Portugal. Activists have been sounding alarms about a humanitarian and sanitary crisis brewing for years, even as they continue to face death threats and sexual violence. Keeping it with South America, where the iconic Machu Picchu, one of the 7 wonders of the world, has been shut down indefinitely, and that's because it's in Peru, where deadly anti-government protests have been raging on for over a month. Peru's Culture Ministry announced that the famed tourist attraction, as well as the trail leading up to the site, have been closed until further notice. This has been done to protect the safety of tourists and people in general. But that sudden decision left hundreds of tourists who were already there stranded. 500 visitors were stuck inside the Machu Picchu and unable to get out. More than 300 of them were foreigners. The nearest functioning airport has also been shut down. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Around the World. Thank you for watching. Keep it with News 9+.